me introduce myself to you. I am Malia, and I am an 18-year-old African schoolgirl. I'm a very fortunate girl, because though neither of my parents went to school, they were determined that all their children would have the opportunity, and they have worked extremely hard to make their dream possible. All through school, my favorite subject has been geography. I guess that's because I like to learn about people who live in other countries. I think it's interesting that nations have different customs and special ways of doing things. Malawi also has many special customs that I'd like to share with you. But rather than just tell you about our customs, I'd like to tell you a story about myself when I was a little girl and show you some pictures of me and my family. That way you can see for yourself how we live and what our customs are like. If you will look at a map of Africa, you will see that my country is in Central Africa. Malawi is a small country, about the size of your state of Tennessee. It is a very poor country, but it is also very beautiful. My village is in the southern part of Malawi, and as you can see, it is certainly not jungle like many people believe. I come from the family of Mr. Mpoka, and there are 9 people in my family. My mother and father, my grandmother, and 6 children. We live in the same village that my mother lived in when she was a little girl, because in southern Malawi, it is the custom for the husband to come and live in the village of his wife after their marriage. In the area where I live, tea is a major crop, so my father earns his living by working on a nearby tea plantation. He picks tea from early morning until late afternoon, but he earns only a little money for this, only a few dollars a day. This would not be enough money to feed our family if we had to buy all our food. But fortunately, we do not have to buy all our food because my mother grows everything we need in our garden. Almost every day my mother goes to the garden where she plants, hoes, and harvests lots of corn and different kinds of vegetables. My sisters and I usually go with her to help with the work. Even our baby sister Atima used to go to the garden riding on my mother's back. 12 years ago, when this story took place, my brothers and sisters looked like this. At that time, Njinga, my oldest brother, was just 13 years old and a 5th grade student. He is the boy wearing the bright blue shirt. At the far left is Tobias, my 2nd oldest brother. Tobias was just a year older than me and a year ahead of me in school. I'm the second girl from the right, sitting between my little brother Juma and my little sister Amba. Juma was 5 years old, Amba 4, and I had just had my 8th birthday. I was very excited on this day of our story because it was my first day to go to school. Early in the morning, just as it was getting light outside, Mother had come to the house of my grandmother to wake my little sister Amba and me. In Malawi, it is the custom for the young girls in the family to live in the house of their grandmother, and for the boys to sleep in the house of their father and mother. I was sound asleep when Mother came to wake me, but as I woke up, I remembered that this was my first day to go to school. Excitedly, I sat up and woke my little sister Amba. Amba and I had chores to do each morning, and after folding up our sleeping mat and blanket, our first job was to sweep outside our house. After that, we went with Mother and Grandmother down to the spring to get the water we would need for the day. Because we were very young, Mother had to fill our pots for us, and then we would all carry the pots of water on our heads back to our village. As soon as we returned home, Mother built a fire in her kitchen and heated a bucket of water for my father to wash in when he got up. He was the only person in our family who had the privilege of bathing in warm water. That is just one of the ways that we show special respect toward our Malawi men. While she did this, Amba and I busied ourselves with the second chore of the morning, which was to wash the dirty plates we had used the night before. When Father arose this morning, he called to me to come to him. I ran and knelt down before him to show that I respected him, and to my surprise, he handed me a beautiful new red dress, a new dress for my first day at school. I held out both my hands to receive the dress, which was another way of showing respect and politeness. I was extremely happy about my present. Excitedly, I ran to the house to put it on, and a few minutes later I was ready for my first day at school. Mother gave Njinga, Tobias, and me some bananas to eat for our lunch, and then Mother helped me tie my lunch on my back with a piece of cloth. The walk to school was a good 4 miles, and my brothers and I quickly set off so we wouldn't be late. Njinga led the way along the paths, winding through the tall elephant grass, since he was the oldest. On the way we passed my favorite market, the place I sometimes liked to come with my mother to sell cornflour. My brothers were annoyed with me for stopping, but I liked the market and wanted to see all the brightly colored bottles that were for sale over in the far corner, or the ladies selling their cornflour. Finally, Njinga's patience with me grew thin, and he pulled me away from the men who were selling rolls of tobacco. Njinga suddenly seemed so much older. I remembered how just a few years ago he wouldn't pay any attention to me at all. He had been too busy playing football with his friends, making toy cars out of banana stalks, or playing like he was wearing high-heeled shoes by sticking rocks on his feet with tar. But now he seemed so grown up and intelligent and wise. Pretty soon we reached a clearing, and I saw my school for the first time. It seemed so big, and there were so many children near it that I was frightened. Very timidly, I peeked around the door into the classroom. Tobias told me not to be afraid, because his second-grade class met in the same room, but I was still frightened. While I was standing in the doorway of the classroom, the teacher called to me to come and get in line with the other children. Then we marched inside to our seats. But when I sat down, the most awful thing happened to me. By mistake, I sat on a big anthill that was growing out of my mud seat. It startled me so I began to cry. I was unhappy, and I didn't want to be at school. I wished I was home making mud dolls with Amba. They were our favorite toys because we could make them ourselves of our friends and other interesting things we saw. Or playing grown-up with my corncob baby doll on my back. I remembered the last time I had cried. Mother had made me stay at home with Njinga while she went to the market. That wasn't so bad, but I was bored because neither of my sisters was home to play with. So, since I couldn't play, I decided I would help my mother by pounding the corn. But Mother's mortar was too big. Then I had a bright idea. I decided I would dig a hole in the ground and pound the corn in the hole. So I took my hoe and dug a nice hole. After that, I put some corn kernels in the hole and began to pound. I was very happy with myself for having had such a good idea. But I'd only been pounding about 10 minutes when it began to rain. Quickly I had run into the house and begged Njinga to help me move the hole inside so I could continue my pounding. But he had just laughed at me and told me it was impossible to bring the hole inside the house. I had been furious at him for laughing at me, and I had cried and cried because my feelings were hurt. That was the last time I had cried. Now I was a big schoolgirl, and I was crying again. I didn't like being at school. But just then, the kind face of my teacher appeared before me, and I realized I had been daydreaming. With a reassuring hand, the teacher led me to a seat in the front of the classroom. Then the teacher handed each of us children a small notebook for our first writing lesson. I received mine with my right hand, my left hand touching my right arm. This is another way of showing respect. In my first writing lesson, I learned to print my first 3 words: Ulalia, Mpopi, and Mapia. After this lesson, the teacher suggested we go outside and have our arithmetic lesson under a big shade tree because it was cooler and lighter. In Malawi villages, children often learn arithmetic using a bamboo counter. The teacher handed me one, and I became so fascinated with it that I forgot to listen to the lesson. Soon the morning classes were over, and I found Tobias so we could have our lunch of bananas together. After the lunch break, we were allowed to do tribal dances. All African children love to dance, and although I was too shy to join in the dances at first, I was soon unable to resist the fun of participating in my favorite dance. Tobias and 2 of his friends beat out a rhythm for our dance on a small drum and with bits of metal. When we were exhausted from dancing, the teacher suggested we sing for a while. By now I was having so much fun, I volunteered to lead my favorite song. It was about a little bird, and it went something like this. By the time I'd finished singing all the verses, it was time for school to end, and I couldn't believe it. Like the bird in the song, the hours had flown away from me. I found Tobias, and together we waved goodbye to Njinga, who had to stay in school longer because he was older. Then Tobias and I started our long journey home, me walking behind him, since it is our custom for the women to walk behind the men. When we arrived home about an hour later, Mother was busy making nsima for dinner. Nsima is the basic food we eat, and it is made by stirring corn flour into a pot of boiling water. We knew that Mother had a special treat for us that evening because a chicken with its legs tied was sitting in the corner of the kitchen. I took off my good dress, and then Amba and I went to collect firewood, which was another one of our daily chores. When we had gathered enough, we put it on our head, our custom for carrying things, and followed the paths back to our village. When Father arrived home from work, he squatted under his favorite tree with my uncle, and when dinner was ready, I took a bowl of nsima and a bowl of chicken relish to my father and brothers to eat. After they had finished eating, Amba and I got out a mat for my mother, grandmother, and us to sit on while we ate. In our village, the men and women eat separately. The excitement of my first day at school had made me very hungry, and I quickly finished the bowl of nsima and chicken relish that Amba and I were supposed to share. And while Father and my brothers went off to visit with some of their friends in the next village, I began telling Mother and Grandmother about my first day at school. I told them about how unhappy I had been when I sat on the anthill by mistake, and they all thought it was very funny. Now it seemed funny to me too, and I laughed as well. Soon Grandmother began telling us some of the old Malawi folk stories, a favorite evening pastime of hers. But as much as I liked to listen to her stories, tonight I was just too tired. My eyelids began to feel heavy, and pretty soon I was falling asleep in my mother's lap and was dreaming about all the wonderful things that were going to happen in the future at school.